Okay, all right, I'm done. Holy fuck. All right.
Congratulations.
Yeah. So I'm not sure how much you know about me before our conversation went out, but I have a lot of these discussions on the internet. I have a lot of these kinds of discussion. I like to call them discussions. People obviously call them debates or whatnot. So there are a couple of like things that I've kind of picked up in terms of how they work, and then in listening to you guys talk, like I notice there are a lot of things that carry over, like things that I mean, I'm trying. How do I phrase this? I'm not trying to sound like really condescending, but like things that I think that you did well and things that you could do better. Is that like a compliment sandwich kind of? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the first things, a big central point that you guys were talking about, that I think you were talking past each other about. Are you familiar with race realists? Do you know these people? Okay, I've talked to a lot of them. For some reason, half of them come from Australia. I don't know why, but in terms of the conversations I have online.
I'm actually thinking of doing my next video on that.
So when I debate about topics of race and everything related to people, I got an email from a guy that studies biology. I think he's doing grad work or whatever, and he posited these topics to me in a very, very, very interesting way that I've never thought of them before. And it, like, when he said these things, like, my mind exploded, and it was so incredibly helpful. So he said that in terms of the medical community, the reason why scientists recognize hierarchies of things is because we classify things based on usage, right? Like, if we're classifying something, we're doing it so that we can get something out of it. So when you hear people say things like scientists don't see race, that's not because scientists are trying to be progressive or politically correct or make people feel better about themselves. It's just because classifying people by race just doesn't really get you much information. In very particular circumstances, certain races of people might be more predisposed towards certain types of genetic diseases, like I think black people and sickle cell anemia is a thing. But you would only ever say that in regards to that specific thing. Like, oh, for this particular disease, people that are black are more likely to be susceptible to this. Much the same way that you would say that people with blue eyes or brown eyes might be susceptible to different things, but you would never say, you know, the blue-eyed people and the brown-eyed people. It just doesn't make sense to classify people in that way, you know?
Yeah.
The reason why I bring this up is because when you were talking to Miss Blaire, I don't think she realized the social kind of stigma that she was inadvertently attaching to certain things. So when she would describe a vagina, as a wound, right?
Yeah.
So I can see where she's coming at this. Can you at least understand her point? In terms of, like, in a very ultra technical way, you are kind of
a surgical procedure involves the creation of a wound in some technical sense.
Yeah. So
yes.
Right.
Granted.
In her attempt to avoid all forms of PC culture and sounding like an SJW, she strives for authenticity and rationality and skepticism and whatnot. Right? They say things like this, but they don't realize that people don't view the word wound in a vacuum. And when you describe somebody's sexual organs as a wound, the connotation that's being carried along with that is so
that is mutilation,
incredibly damaging.
That it is,
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
I think that one of the biggest fucking horrible things about debates, and you said this and I actually really disagree, where you said that it was heated and maybe it needed to be more heated, is that sometimes when they get heated, and I know this because I get heated debates more than anybody else on the fucking internet, and I do this all the time, and I consider it to be a major flaw of mine, is that when you start getting really heated, it becomes really hard to take a step back and kind of realize, like, okay, what exactly is this person saying, and what exactly is it that we disagree about? Because I think it got to a point to where, especially, and this was just one of a few topics where this happened, but when you guys started talking about kind of the terminology in terms of, like, what do you consider to be a woman, I think that you guys had more common ground than you realized, but you were talking past what exactly was going on. So another example is when you were talking about Miss Blaire was saying, like, I don't think there is a such thing as a trans woman that's a woman. She is a trans woman, right?
Yeah.
So again, that's another thing where, like, technically she was right, but she doesn't realize that by calling somebody a trans woman and saying that they can never truly be a woman, like, you're doing something that is incredibly damaging in cultural ways and in psychological ways, right, to people, in terms of telling somebody, like, hey, by the way, you can never actually be a woman, right?
Well, it's bad ideas about what language is and how it works, is what I think. Like, she thinks that's what she's being is so, like, she's being so straightforward, right? Or so she's accurately describing terms, or she's not pulling any punch. She's just telling it like it is. but ignoring that, like, when you say that, what language actually does is that when you say someone's not a real woman, what it does, like, as if that's not in some way invalidating of someone's identity. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
and I totally agree with what I mean. I agree with you.
It's really hard. As someone who's like very obtuse when it comes to like considering the connotations that words have, in addition to just like the direct meaning that they have, it's very difficult to explain to them why people are getting upset by the things that they say if they won't look at the connotation and they won't look at the subtext.
Sure, for sure, and I agree with what you're saying, and I think it would be helpful, like when you're having a discussion with somebody else, to identify that as the cause, because what your conversation really needs to be about is, do you think that, well, first of all, why do you use this connotation, and do you think it accomplishes the purpose that you want it to accomplish, right? And then you could have a discussion on, well, she says, okay, well, I don't think that trans women are biological women. I think they are trans women. So then, like, your question could be, okay, do you see how that when you use that type of terminology, you are empowering groups of people that don't even view transgender issues as real issues, right? You're giving them an entirely separate subclass of person to put these people into, and then you reinforce that by using a totally separate word, you know, like, and then you can have kind of a conversation on that, because I think you would find more.
I mean, I feel like I effectively did bring that point up when I said that what she's doing is reiterating the same things that people say in order to exclude trans people from bathrooms and characterizing them as impersonators and invaders and all this stuff. I think I did bring that up.
Yeah, but the problem, so this is a big problem, and I really empathize with Miss Blaire here. I've been streaming for 7 years professionally, and maybe up until like 4 or 5 years ago, I was a very, very right-leaning person. Like, you would find me online defending the use of the word faggot and all sorts of stuff. I'm very, very, very right-leaning, and I would have used the same arguments that she uses for almost everything. The big problem that you run into is that she, and I don't know if this is true about her. I hate that entire community on YouTube, so I'm trying to be charitable. I don't know if this is true about her, but it's entirely possible that she could feel that trans women are allowed, are endowed with all the same rights as normal women, right? Or as other biological women. She might totally feel that way. And she might think that calling them trans women, calling women is a totally okay thing. So what happens is when you say, hey, when you call these people trans women, you know, you bring up all of this kind of connotation and all of these other things, but since she personally doesn't feel that way, she feels like you're trying to ascribe beliefs to her that she doesn't have. And that's why she kept saying during the debate, you keep saying that I think all these things. You keep saying, right? She kept feeling like you were personally ascribing beliefs to her. You know?
It is one of the difficulties to explain that connotation is not the same thing as intention. Like, whether you intend a word to connote something or not, words exist in a social context where they have associations already, right? There's a long history of linguistic usage. And so when you use a word, the word has a bunch of associations that are related to the past ways it's been used. And so whether or not you intend it to be used in a way, it has implications that have to do with the ways that it has been used before. So to insist that, I didn't mean that, that means that's not part of the meaning. It's just a wrong way to look at it, because you can't just look at what your intentions are. You have to also look at the way you have to look at the history of the word. You have to look at the context.
Yeah, and I agree.
But, and
like,
not,
what you're saying, like, and this is all I'm trying to say is that, like, obviously I agree with everything you're saying, but like focusing the conversation around these topics, I think would be really beneficial, because until you have this squared away, if you're arguing with somebody about if you're arguing with her about what you should call transgender people, but you guys don't agree necessarily on how connotation works, that's common ground that you'll never find, you know?
I mean, I agree with you, but the thing is, it's so, like, in a context like that where, like, she's trying to save face and I'm there trying to defend myself, like, it's just hard to have, like, a serious conversation about, like, philosophy of language.
Yeah, and I know it's shitty, but like these kinds of conversations, it kind of reminds me about when you're arguing about abortion, right? If you've got somebody that fundamentally believes a fetus is a human, and you've got somebody that fundamentally believes that a fetus is just a bundle of cells, these people can't really have a conversation about higher level topics, like what rights should you have to an abortion? Well, I mean, because because both sides are begging the question, right? On one side, somebody is saying that a fetus is a human, well, therefore you can't kill a human. It's literally circular logic on both sides. And the other side is saying, well, a fetus is just a bundle of cells, so obviously you can have an abortion. Both sides are begging the question. Both sides are circularly reasoning. So when they try to discuss things with each other, if they don't agree on those fundamentals, it's like you're screaming past each other, you know?
Well, again, but the thing, and to debate the fundamentals, you would have to go into like this like weird, abstract, high-level philosophy about what it means to be a human being, and like that kind of like thinking doesn't lend itself well to the debate format.
Yeah, which is frustrating, and I agree with you to some extent. But like when I argue sociological issues with people, a lot of it, and it sounds dumb to say, but a lot of these come down to philosophical conversations on agency, and a lot of people will get into this thing where it's like when you talk, say for instance, the black community in the United States, right? Well, there are problems in the black community. Why don't they just take responsibility for themselves? Why don't they just act better? Why don't they just stop glorifying, right? And it's like, okay, well, people don't necessarily act like, oh, so you're saying black people don't have agency? You're the real racist. Well, no, nobody has agency, really, right? We're all victims of circumstance to a large extent. You know, like kids in Uganda aren't growing up to become pro gamers, and kids in the United States don't grow up learning subsistence farming. You know, to some extent, right? But you have to like, it feels stupid, but I feel like you really do have to back up like 50 million steps. And in all the conversations or debates I've had with Sargon of Akkad, like these are the same things. Like I'll get people like my debate with Sargon of Akkad, he would literally tell me, so like this was his line of thinking. He's like, okay, people that get married in the United States do a lot better than single people. Why don't black people get married? And I was like, well, there's a lot of reasons why black people don't get married. He's like, point to me the one law keeping black people from getting married. And it's like, well, fuck, dude, like it doesn't work that way. What do you mean? Yeah. It's really frustrating when you disagree on fundamentals and you try to argue higher level concepts. Like it ends up you scream past each other so much. It's really frustrating, I think.
Yeah, I don't know if it was a good idea to debate Blaire or not. I mean, also we were running into issues where I was just, we were talking about this issue of her bullying, and it was like she would just concede, like, yeah, I guess I should be nice to her, but I'm not, and and like, how do you respond to that? Like,
well, the problem with this one here was and this is why I don't really like the Blaire person, and I said earlier I was being charitable, but I feel like in some of the arguments, I feel like she revealed a lot of the kind of inner workings of what she thought, which is very strange because she was a trans person. So when she would talk about, this is actually a very difficult question that I have with all of transgender people and issues, is she was talking about very traditional gender roles in a very strange manner. Like when she would talk about passing, like if this person isn't passing, then they don't count as like the gender. Okay, well, what about tomboys, right? Like somebody that might have short hair in real life and a smaller, flatter chest or whatever. Is this person not like a woman to you? Like, do they not pass to you?
Yeah, well, she's enforcing she enforces every transphobic norm, including this one where, like, because I mean, a trans woman sort of can't win, because if a trans woman is intensely feminine in the traditional sense, very normative, wears lots of makeup, lots of, high heels and so on, the accusation against them is always that they're caricaturing women, it's exaggerated femininity, they're reinforcing traditional gender roles. But on the other hand, if a trans woman doesn't shave her legs and doesn't act feminine, like, then the accusation is that they're not really a woman, they're not taking it seriously. Why should I even call it, like, you want to call this person she when they don't even shave their legs? And like, so it's like
those statements that you were making were actually like, and I'm on the fence about a lot of transgender issues, but a lot of what she was saying was pretty offensive. The idea that she's not really passing enough for me to use her pronouns, that's like, damn, dude, you as a transgender person really want to go that route? Like, I look at you and I think you kind of have a square chin, so now I'm going to call you a he because you didn't get the proper plastic surgery. And you brought that up, checking off enough boxes to like,
It's, I mean... Yeah, I mean, there's a reason that we say that Blaire is. I mean, she reiterates all the transphobic tropes, just does it as a trans person, but it doesn't make it any easier to argue with.
Yeah, there are these people that exist. They're like
makes it harder to argue with.
That sounds bad, but kind of like the Uncle Toms of the other communities. She kind of fills in the.
Blaire is absolutely that. I mean, it's the Milo Yiannopoulos.
No, I'm just gonna bring that up. Meme jack me.
The black guy who goes on CNN to talk about how black people are the real racists. Like, they love these people. Yeah. And like,
and I kind of wonder sometimes, like, how financially invested are they in their opinions that they couldn't really change.
Scary. I mean, this debate was about finances. She refused to have it unless she had the chat going, and the chat was just going so that she could get money from people paying for super chat or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
So it was I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't have done the other debate.
That was my favorite part. Hold on one second. I got a question from the audience. Destiny, everything you said was very much correct, and I think Contrapoints is a fucking moron in like 15 different ways. I actually totally agree with that comment. Contrapoints, what do you think about that?
Wait, what did they say? They said I'm a moron?
No, I'm just saying that was like the whole, that was like her entire reading of questions at the end was like, oh, everything you said was so correct, and Contrapoints is so wrong.
Well, right,
like,
because it's her channel and her audience. So right, that's what the audience is like. It's like, you're correct, Blaire. Like, here's why the thing that you said is still correct. Like, so yeah. Well, I was sitting there. I should have brought my fridge downstairs and brought the bottle of wine with me.
Sure.
I would have cracked it open in that.
I think that there are interesting. I think that it would do really well sometimes to fuck. It's so hard. I can give this as advice to you, and then I'm gonna have a debate tomorrow with somebody, and I'm gonna ignore everything I say. But like being able to take a step back and understand exactly what the person is arguing, so that you can find your disagreements rather than like trying to get really heated. Because I think that when people get heated, they end up talking past each other a lot. I feel like she like taking a moment to really stop and think about her arguments against oh God, I just left my mind. When you guys were talking about like a cure for transgenderism, I'm not even sure what. That's a really interesting conversation, because I think that's another area where it kind of reveals the inner machinations of her mind, whether or not she actually wanted it to. Because I guess in her mind, she feels that every single person's gender should align with their biological sex or whatever. Like, that is a belief that after listening to that conversation, I'm 99% positive that she holds that belief fundamentally, right?
And she also essentially believes in maintaining like very traditional gender roles. Yeah. She doesn't like anything that challenges that.
Mm-hmm. And I think that that's a good conversation to have. So, like, rather than talking to each other about, like, do you think there should be a cure, or is it offensive, blah, 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 like, stepping back and going, okay, do you think that being transgendered or being a transgender person, is that a mental illness? Should biological and sex and gender sex always match each other, right? Because, and this is another thing that I didn't hear you go on much about, although I think you kind of tried to bring it up, is that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm pretty behind on a lot of trans things, but gender dysphoria isn't the mismatch of your mind and body, but rather it's the distress that you feel due to that mismatch, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so and a lot of that distress is a cultural or social phenomenon, much the same way that, like, I don't know if she realized it or not, but every single argument that she was making about curing, transgender mindset could have been used, or I'm sorry, let me back that up and say was used for homosexual people. Right?
Yes, I kind of tried to press that point too, especially when it came to this idea about conversion therapy, and again, it's maddening to see her insist that we should be developing therapy to cure people of transgenderism without any evidence at all to suggest that this is possible, and especially in view of a history of a century of people attempting to cure homosexuality with essentially brutal, ineffective treatments. And so, of course, people are offended when you talk about this. But, like, again, she then retreats to this, like, very lofty philosophical position where it's like, well, like, but it's just this faith that, like, oh yeah, of course we should be able, we could. If only the politically correct norms of psychiatric research abated, then we could finally investigate the cure to gender dysphoria. But, like, there's just no reason to think that's the case.
Did you ever watch any of Joe Rogan and Milo Yiannopoulos?
I'm not sure I have.
A lot of that conversation kind of reminded me of Milo, where Milo gives the answer, and I hate to say this because I sound self-hating, but I'm not self-hating, but, like, Milo gives all the answers that straight people really want to hear. When Joe Rogan asks Milo about his homosexuality, Milo's like, oh yes, of course I wish I was straight. And Joe Rogan's like, well, doesn't that make you a self-hating gay? And he's like, no, I don't hate that I'm gay. It's just my life would be so much better and everything would be so much better if I was straight, and just being straight would be so much better, but unfortunately I'm gay. But I'm not a self-hating gay, right? It's kind of like a similar thing where she, and I thought this was really interesting. Again, this was like another insight into her mind. When she wanted to compare being a transgender person to having autism, right? Autism is, and this might be offensive to some people in the autism community, because I know different people feel differently about different things, but I'm pretty sure that most people agree that autism is a strictly bad thing, right? This is something that unless you're like an autistic savant or something, right? Autism or Down syndrome are strictly bad things, right? If you have a person and then you endow them with autism or whatever, right? They're going to be strictly worse off for it. Not to say that.
So I actually don't know that's true with autism, because I know there's a lot of autism advocates who advocate for this, the rights of neuroatypicality, as they say.
Sure.
So, like,
That might be true.
I'm not sure that's true.
And while that may be true, you know that she doesn't view it that way, right? I don't think so.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So the fact that she was comparing being transgender to something that, in her mind, she views autism as being a strictly worse thing, right, than being non-autistic,
yes, she
right?
does.
I think that's an interesting insight into her, again, viewing that, being transgender is the disorder, not the dysphoria or not the depression that comes along with the mind and body mismatch, but rather just being transgender is a mistake, is a disability in and of itself. And I think that these are really good things that warrant a lot of conversation. And again, it's not as fun for a debate, and it doesn't feel as fruitful to go back to these really fundamental things. But like when you have fundamental disagreements like that, nothing at a higher level is ever going to be agreed upon, right? If you have somebody that, because that's something where even you would argue, I believe, you would argue that we should be seeking a cure for transgender people if transgenderism is actually a strictly worse human condition that is only a disability, right? Yeah, but if you disagree on that, then obviously, right, the logic becomes circular again, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's... I don't know, because the thing is, again, I think the analogy with homosexuality is helpful, because there's... you can argue, of course, that like in some ways being homosexual does make your life worse. It's much more difficult to be homosexual than it is to be heterosexual, but I don't know. I just
focusing on whether those difficulties come from within or without are very, very, very important, right?
Yeah, and it's hard not to read it as a kind of prejudice to say, if you were to say like, I wish there were a cure for homosexuality, and this is why I do. I mean, so like I know Zinnia used the word transgenocide, which is maybe going too far, but like, you can see why that stings for people to hear that
of course. And it sounds extreme, but you can go back 100 years ago and say like, if only there was a way to turn black people into white people, like it would be so much better. Like look at all the problems black people have, and like
exactly.
Yeah, it's the same kind of thing.
And in some sense, like black people would, because it's true in some sense, it would be easier to live your life as a white person. Of course it is.
Not even in some sense, but in most senses, it would be absolutely true, right?
Yeah. But to then say that the problem is that we should be curing blackness, like,
of course. Or to bring it full circle, almost, you could have argued 100 years ago it would be easier for women to be cured of their womenness and just be turned into men.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, on the one hand, I don't know if I've succeeded that much with this debate. On the other hand, I'm not sure I could do that much better. Maybe it was a mistake to debate Blaire. I don't know. A lot of people told me it was. A lot of people told me not to. I don't know. I'll have to watch it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really tough thing, especially when you consider the kind of audiences that these people gather. I don't know. Like they said last time, she said that like, oh no, it got rated by... Did you watch her discussion with Lacey Green?
Yeah.
They always say that like, oh, 4chan, rated the discussions. Like, well, 4chan doesn't raid my discussions all the time. Like, I don't think it's so much that 4chan raids her discussions so much as 4chan probably holds her in high esteem.
I mean, right, and that's the disingenuous bullshit that I always hear from her. She says, "Oh, the entire internet has people who shitpost. Like that's just what it's like to be online." And I'm like, "Not when I do live streams. Like it's the 1488 brigade doesn't show up to post millions of swastikas when I do live streams. Like maybe you should consider the fact that these people seem to be attracted to your content.
Yeah,
and maybe you should question what that means. But no, she doesn't. Again, they insist that I've seen a lot of people who are." Blaire and a lot of the YouTube kind of right-wing camp.
No, not right-wing. They're liberals.
Yeah, not right-wing. They're liberals. They're liberals. They just think things may have gone too far, and that's why they voted for Trump.
Yeah. But they didn't vote. They voted for Trump as a reaction to SJW. Dude.
Right. This is just SJW's fault. Without SJWs, they'd be perfect liberals.
Where's the graphic? Doesn't anybody have a link to the picture? Are you familiar with the Sargon of Akkad guy?
Am I familiar with Sargon?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Okay, yeah. I view him as like one of like the central pillar figureheads, and there's the fucking picture I retweeted. It's the guy with the sunglasses. And he's like, when you're a liberal but you support Trump, you believe in like race realism, you're anti-immigration, you believe in you don't believe in anything having to do with sociology. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, it's.
But you're a liberal.
It's Sargon. It's the Amazing Atheist. Like it's a lot of these guys. Like they. Well, the Amazing Atheist has more credibility saying he's a liberal because at least he made some videos like actively supporting Bernie Sanders. Whereas Sargon, I mean, like all he does is complain about progressives and vote Tory and like talk about how great Donald Trump is. Like there's just no credibility whatsoever for saying that you're anything but conservative at a certain point.
What if Sargon has just political dysphoria? Nice comment.
Political dysphoria.
I don't know if there's something that you are familiar with or not. This is something that I kind of noticed a while ago. Is that this thing? Are you familiar with Gamergate at all?
Oh yeah.
Did we talk about this at all the last time we spoke?
Maybe, I don't remember.
There, something happened with Gamergate, and this describes a lot of the current online YouTube quote unquote skeptic community. Is that basically what happened was Gamergate rallied up all of the anti-SJWs on the internet, and what happened was once you were plugged into this anti-SJW rhetoric, you also started to fall into this wider thing of it went from anti-SJWs kind of trying to mess with games into anti-SJWs in general, into anti-PC culture, into PC culture was associated with liberals, into somehow you're supporting Trump. And everything having to do with all of the demagoguery on the right, because all of a sudden, at first you were just against SJWs ruining video games, but now you're against PC culture saying horrible things like Muslim people shouldn't be hated against for being Muslim. You're like, oh wait, that's PC, right? I noticed that you can draw these really strange lines from all these gamers and young men online that were in Gamergate that are now in the Trump camp, and they got carried along that kind of current. And the best example of this, the funniest example of this is, do you know who Thunderfoot is?
Oh, yeah.
Thunderfoot is a liberal. Did you know that?
Yeah,
He's actually a liberal. I didn't know this until 2 months ago. He's really a liberal. And I didn't know this because if you look at Thunderfoot's channel and you organize his videos, a lot of his really popular videos are just relentlessly shitting on SJWs. That's like, or feminists, right?
Yeah, specifically Anita Sarkeesian, which was kind of his niche. Yeah.
And there are all these people that built their like entire YouTube careers on being anti-PC culture, anti-SJW. But the funny thing is, if you look at a Thunderfoot video and you bring up any of his videos where he talks about Brexit or Trump, both of which he is dramatically opposed to, not like Sargon, but is actually very much opposed to.
Vocally and actively, yeah.
He is like the thumbs down on those videos. It's like 50% of the people.
Yeah, yep.
So you look at the kind of audiences they build, and I think it's very interesting that that sometimes these people act surprised, and you get these people that are like, what? There are a lot of people that say they're Nazis in my oh no, they're just trolls. Like I don't believe that at all. And it's like, well, you spend all of your time talking about these. Another example that I bring up is like one of the things that's been kind of hot recently is political violence, right? So for me personally, I'm against any form of political violence, period. I don't like it at all. So when Richard Spencer got punched in the face, I was tweeting out that night that I don't think this should be championed. I don't think it's good to punch people, even if they are Nazis, because I don't think it's a good way to act in the United States, right? And obviously, a lot of people on the right were tweeting at me like, oh, Destiny, I'm so glad that you stand up for this. Like, it's cool that you can be level-headed and you can't be biased, and that's cool, right? Well, just recently, we had an Antifa protest where a guy walks up and sucker punches a chick, and you've got people like Sargon tweeting, well, looks like equal rights have come to roost. Oh, it's only bad when a woman gets it. Like, okay, so what do you actually support, dog? Like, what are you actually in favor of?
Yeah, it's inconsistent, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think Thunderfoot is a fascinating case because I've been watching that guy since like 2008, no joke. Like, I was a teenager when I started watching him. Originally, all his videos were against creationism. And, I mean, that's a reasonable cause to be against. So, but, you know, his videos against creationism were quite good. But at some point, you know, this is leading up into the Gamergate era, and around that same time, he just switched over to full-time feminist bashing. Yeah. Particular Anita Sarkeesian bashing, who he's made about 55 videos.
Jesus Christ.
Anita Sarkeesian. He's made more videos about. He's made, like, if you take all the videos I've ever made on my channel and multiply that by 2, that's how many videos he's made about Anita Sarkeesian.
Yeah.
It's
and
weird.
there is most popular content. If you go to his channel and you sort his videos by most viewed, you've got like half of them are bashing creationists, and the other half are about feminists and SJWs.
And I strongly suspect that the simple let's look at it. The simple popularity of those videos. I mean, it's hard to avoid the idea that you know, I'm sure I don't think that he's just making these videos for attention. I think he actually probably believes this. But once he started making videos about Anita Sarkeesian and feminists and SJWs, he probably noticed that they were hugely popular. And so he kept doing it. But he's now in this weird situation where the guy's actually, like, when it comes to economic and other political issues, he is a liberal. He really is.
Yeah.
Like, the idea of Trump being president is abhorrent to him. Brexit is awful to him. And so he's in this weird position now where he sort of realizes that he's built this big right-wing audience that he never wanted.
Yeah. And I feel like you have to balance out your shit. Like you have to find a balance. Like you have to be cognizant of what you're talking about. Because you can't just, like, I could talk about black issues in the United States today, and all of it factually. Like, black people are overrepresented in the amount of crime they commit. They're overrepresented in our prisons, even if you control for disproportionately poor treatment in the justice system. They're overrepresented in impoverished societies. They have done worse since the 60s in terms of the, like, I could point out all of these issues, but if I made video after video after video pointing out these issues, but I never gave, like, the other end, like, I never said, like, okay, well, redlining, Jim Crow, lead paint in the walls of these shitty cities, like all sorts of different types of things have also contributed. Like, if I never give that point, I can't just wake up one day and then post a video saying, like, hey, I think this black guy is great, and then everybody's like, wait a second, what the fuck, black people are horrible, blah, blah, blah. And I can't, like, be surprised that this is my audience, like, this is the audience that I've cultivated and built. You have to be cognizant of your messaging,
Well, it seems like a weird, like, level of, like, lack of perceptiveness on his part that he hasn't noticed the fact that he's accumulating a right-wing audience by making this persistent anti-SJW content. Like, the fact that he surely can't be surprised by this. And maybe. Yeah.
This is kind of where I will sympathize and I will be charitable here, because in some ways these people were me, like, 6 years ago. So, like, for instance, like the example that I always give is, like, I used to say the word faggot a lot, but I would always give every argument you've ever heard for somebody saying that. I would give, right? I don't actually hate gay people. I'm not trying to disparage gay people, and I said all of that because I really meant that. I really believed it. I've never been homophobic in my life. I used to say faggot a lot, but I've never been homophobic, right? But what I failed to realize was that there are other people that do say it, that hear me say it, and then laugh when I say it and love when I say it, who are actually homophobic, right? And bridging that gap is very, very, very difficult for me. Much the same way, to kind of bring it back, that when Miss Blaire says that a trans vagina is a wound, maybe she doesn't mean it horribly in her head, but when any other person says that, right, you would never ever say to somebody undergoing any form of cosmetic surgery, hey, your boob wounds look really good. They, that turned out really well. You would never say that.
I think it would help to expose her to some of the people that I'm comparing to her to. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, it would help for her to see the intensely transphobic people from across the political spectrum, because I think transphobia is not a specifically right or left-wing phenomenon. It would be helpful for her to see those people saying the exact same things that she says and using those arguments to make intensely transphobic points. So that's maybe something I should think about if I decide to engage with her more in the future. But I think that, I completely empathize with the experience that you're describing, because I've had it myself where I tweet a certain opinion or I say a certain opinion and I find that the people agreeing with me are all the wrong people.
Sure,
and that makes me question what I'm doing.
And that's definitely happened with me before, where I'll tweet a certain thing, or I'll believe a certain thing. But, like, again, like, I think if you're an intellectually honest person, you have to call people out for saying that. For instance, I shit on Trump for a lot of different things, right? But if I see people bringing things up like, Trump, Trump dodged all of his taxes, blah 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 blah, like, and this is something that I disagree with. If Trump evaded taxes in a legal way, I think that he should absolutely do it. Like, the problems with the tax code, not with Trump. Like, I'll try to be careful and call people out on that, because I don't want a bunch of people on my side that don't believe in a lot of the same things that I believe in, right? I think you have to be aware of that. One thing that she did that bothers me, that a lot of people do sometimes, and I don't know if what we said earlier would even work on her, is a lot of people are really quick to write off negative people as just trolls. Have you ever heard somebody say that? Like, oh, the Donald, Poll, those guys are just trolls. They don't actually believe. I've
heard it 1,000 times.
Yeah, like that. Come on, dude. Like this, and this was like, this was the thing that blows my mind. Like, so you have the archetypal, trans racially integrated guy, Asian white man with multiracial parents, who goes to work, works in a multiracial environment, and then he comes home and he kisses his multiracial wife and he hugs his multiracial, and then he gets on his computer and all he does for the next 6 hours are talk about how horrible black people are on 4chan. Like, do you think these people actually exist? Like, come on, dude.
It's not. I mean, also, if you look at, like, Poll and stuff, like, the sense of irony and humor has long faded. There's, like, very serious discussions of strategy going on. Like, it's not even like to me that suggestion is really
it's asinine. It's absolutely ridiculous. One thing that I noticed that Oh shit! I totally just lost it. Oh no! One thing that I noticed that a lot of people aren't willing to admit, and there are people even in my fan base that will continue to argue with me about this, is that and it's absolutely true. The type of humor that you laugh at is indicative to some extent of the type of stuff
of what
that you
believe.
Yeah.
Yes.
If every single joke you read and laugh at, like if the butt of the joke is a woman or the butt of the joke is a black man, and like these are all of your types of jokes, you can't just deflect at the end and go, oh, what? It's just humor, dude. It's like, okay, but why do you think it's funny? You know, like
humor is not ideologically neutral.
Yeah. And that's not to say I think you should be able to joke about most things, and I'll laugh at a ton of racial humor, but it's a wide variety of racial humor. Like I don't constantly, let me find all of the jokes I can about Indian people eating and sitting in shit, or black people, whatever, 50 million stereotypes, and then talk about this humor all day long for all the fucking time I spent on the internet, and be like, oh, what? I just happen to find jokes where blacks are treated as subhuman to be very funny. Why are you judging me for that? I was like, well, dude, I mean, like.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and there's kind of a difference between to me what has to do with it is, I mean, you can make good jokes about race, but do the jokes show usually great jokes about race show some kind of deep understanding of the way race works? If instead the joke relies on your belief in very crude caricatures, that kind of joke isn't funny unless you believe those jokes are funny.
Sure.
Sorry. It's not funny unless you believe that there's some reality.
The stereotype. Yeah.
The stereotypes are, yeah.
Yeah, of course. Like if you were to go down to like Indiana or some shit, and you were to make like some certain types of really offensive, uneducated redneck jokes, right? They probably wouldn't find it to be very humorous.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Some of the comments mentions Dave Chappelle, because Dave Chappelle has not good things to say about gay and trans people, but his jokes about race are possibly the funniest jokes about race of all time. Mm-hmm. And part of the reason they're so good is because they often involve a very deep understanding of the way the social understanding of race works.
Sure.
And so there's a relationship between humor and truth. And between like humor and moral perception.
Yeah, but I think satire is like impossible to do. It's like a dying fucking thing. I don't remember if I brought this up to you last time, but like I remember like all the different comedians, Louis C.K., Chris Rock, Dave Chappelle, that have all expressed like these great regrets for doing any type of racial or homophobic related skits, because what was satire has become ammunition for, how many racist white dudes use Chris Rock's, N-words versus... I don't even know what I can say on Twitch without getting banned anymore, right? But like his famous skit, right?
Yes, yeah. Well, and I've heard Dave Chappelle say basically the same thing when it comes to some of the stuff on the Chappelle show. He saw like white like frat boys laughing essentially, and realizing like they're not laughing the reason he wanted them to be laughing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that was the same thing that I had, and I thought it was so funny that I read this afterwards. But that was the same thing that happened with me with the word faggot. Is I was listening to two dudes talk, and one of them said it, and I realized like what they were talking about. I was like, holy fuck, these guys actually fucking hate gay people. It's like I don't ever want these people to listen to me and think that they have a friend. Yeah. In what I'm saying.
Yeah. That's an incredibly important like moment in terms of. And in terms of deciding, how you want to act is the moment where you see the way. I mean, because there's one thing because I agree in some ways that's a much more powerful experience than just the fact that some gay people are offended. That's easier to dismiss, actually, I think, than seeing that homophobes are amused.
Sure. And
that's
but it's really hard to
doesn't it? Yeah.
It feels like you need like a certain level of maybe self-reflection to get that. I don't even know, like, because it's so easy to deflect all of that. Like if you show somebody, like, well, hey, look, like actual homophobic or transphobic or racist people take the words you say and they think it's funny because they actually hate these people. And you're like, well, that's just a few of those people. Or like I don't believe that there's a responsibility for, I can't be held responsible for how people interpret my message. Like that's not on me at all. Like that's totally on. And it's like, well, I mean, it kind of is, Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. No. Right. There's this intense desire to totally evade any responsibility for the way that your words are going to be taken by the people who are actually listening to you, and then, but that's it's evasion. It's not fair representation of the way language is used, which is to communicate with real people. You should know who your audience is and how they're going to take it. Yeah. That's part of what you take into consideration when you speak.
And it's triply infuriating because these are the same people that will take like one thing said out of context and like give the most uncharitable possible definition to it. The woman who got up at the DNC and said that that maybe white people need to listen to minorities sometimes. Did you ever hear like the context of that statement?
I don't know. I don't.
It was basically, it was a larger talk about how minorities experience specific issues in the United States, and sometimes if you're a non-minority, you don't really understand these issues because you don't really experience them, right? So maybe sometimes it's good to be quiet and listen to minorities, right? Well, obviously, this gets quoted as all white people should shut up, right? Or if you listen to Sargon of Akkad, like all white people, so they're saying all white people should shut up. Yeah, and it's like, okay, dude, like, come on, man. Like, we're going to give the absolute most uncharitable interpretation to every person that you dislike.
I feel that's how I feel about the Milo Stewart thing that happened on you. Like, this came up in the stream with Blaire White tonight, but that's how I feel about that whole phenomenon where basically like they take a slightly misworded sentence and then interpret it in the worst possible way and catastrophize about it endlessly. So again, Milo says that all white people are racist. They hear that as all white people are actual Klansmen trying to, lynch black people or whatever. And then they run with that as if that's what really was intended, when clearly that's not what he meant to say.
Sure. I talked with and I just had this conversation yesterday too. Like this, and people do this with everything. The super charitability to one end, and then like the ultra criticism of the other end. It's really funny if you look at certain subreddits. People do this with sources all the time. Where it's like if you go to a subreddit like Pussy Pass or some shit, right? You'll get a link from The Sun, The Daily Mail, The Wire, The Daily Wire, whatever, right? You get all these like shit blog spam sites, and it's like, oh, look at this, like but then you'll get like an article from like that they disagree with from like The Independent or the BBC or Time. It's like, and then they go into like full on like ridiculous, like, well, is this actually a good study? Like, who's the journalist? Like, what are their associations? Like, is there any form of bias? And it's like they turn into like the most skeptic, critical people in the world. It's like, okay, it's some.
Well,
crazy.
that's. It's one of my problems with the whole skeptical posture in general is that it's become a kind of it has a political slant to it now, and it's very selectively applied skepticism.
Yeah, or it's this stupid I think people kind of joke about it and call it like the radical centrist, like this stupid idea where you have to be like central on every issue and somehow that makes you enlightened. Ben Shapiro,
because anything between two extremes is correct. Is the indefensible assumption that lies at the base of this.
Yeah, of course, and it always sounds good because you're like, well, listen, I think both of you have some valid points, right? And you've got, there are the funny pictures on the internet. We've got one guy on the left is saying things like, and it's in all caps, and he's like, I think that all people should be treated equal, and we shouldn't blah blah blah, and we shouldn't murder people. And then the guy on the right is wearing a Nazi uniform, and he's like, well, okay, dude, I'm a Nazi, but I respect your opinion, and I think you should respect mine too. It's just like
yeah, right, cool. Well, some of these things that there are sort of general ideas that in certain contexts work, but when you apply them to situations involving Nazis, they don't work. The notion that you just respect everyone's opinions, and this is some of the trouble I have with debating someone like Blaire too, is that I think she kind of defies the rules of civil discourse a lot of the time on her channel, when, in terms of misgendering people, attacking people's physical appearance and things. And so then when it comes to arguing with her, I'm sort of left in a weird position where it's like I have to talk about how I have to be civil while talking about her incivility.
Yeah, it's really difficult. Yeah. Like, how do you have a conversation with somebody who's intellectually dishonest? Like, it's a really difficult thing to engage with that community. Like,
yeah. I don't know the answer.
Yeah. Okay, since I bothered you, we had completely unrelated discussions a day ago, and so I want to ask you a question about something. Do you have to leave it? Let me know if you have to leave at any point. I don't want to
I'll leave in like 10 minutes.
Okay, sure. Okay, sick. Yeah. All right. So this is a total sidestep. You did philosophy in school, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I want to talk to you about what I consider. I have no educational background in philosophy. Let me warn you right off the bat, okay? And I want to completely dismiss compatibilism as absolute fucking nonsense, okay? I want you to save it for me and break it down for me, okay? So
compatibilism. Okay.
are you familiar with like the all the free agency and everything memes?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is my understanding of it, okay? And then you can correct my understanding or you can make compatibilism make sense to me, okay? So here's my understanding of it. Okay, so a determinist, I would consider myself, I guess, a determinist, right? A determinist says that every single thing in the universe is caused by a cause, and every effect, every cause precedes every effect, and everything is antecedent, and there is no true free thought, free will. It doesn't exist, because before you're born, every decision you will ever make has already been decided more or less based on the precursor conditions, right? Is essentially what determinism is.
Yeah.
So what the compatibilist says is okay, I want to talk about free will, okay? And I think that free will exists. And the reason why I think free will exists is because, well, it kind of has to, because all of ethics and morals kind of rely on us being able to make decisions and have agency. Because if we don't make decisions, how can we assign moral rights or wrongs to anything? So now that I've already established that free will must exist, I'm going to take parts of compatibilism, like the fact that we make choices, even if they're predetermined, and I'm going to call that free will, and then I'm going to pretend that we have, like, compatibilized free will and determinism. This is like my impression of it, and it seems really stupid. Can you make sense of this for me?
So yeah, I guess the way I think compatibilists usually kind of make sense of it is what they are arguing is that like the part of free will that matters is not incompatible with determinism. So what they're saying is that a lot of the main objections against the libertarian argument is there's no good way to make sense of libertarianism, since oftentimes, even if we believe in free will, we don't want to think that our actions are just so randomness would be the wrong way to characterize them, right? We like to think that we're acting for reasons, which itself is a kind of determinism. So sometimes compatibilists will try to say some kind of, they'll make some kind of distinction between external or internal cause of your actions. And so long as like you are the uncoerced causer of your actions, you are sort of, it's freedom in a sense, and that your system, even if the system itself works in terms of causal determinism.
So it's like the difference between like picking a brand of cereal you like versus a guy holding a gun to your head and telling you which brand of cereal to pick.
Yeah, something like that. And this is the argument they have to make is basically they have to sort of limit what freedom means to a more narrow sense and say that's good enough. Yeah. Basically is.
I guess the thing that bothers me is though when they talk about freedom, this isn't really like let's say that you're somebody that believes in free will. Would you agree that when the layman speaks about free will, they are not talking about compatibilism? They're talking about like libertarian free will, right? Would you agree that that's the layman version of it?
I guess what I think is that the layman version just doesn't make that much sense at all.
Yeah, of course.
Like, the layman version isn't well thought out.
Which is what everybody in philosophy seems to have agreed upon. So it seems like compatibilists, like everything that compatibilism says, it seems like it's also said in determinism. Like the compatibilist doesn't make any unique claims from a determinist. They just try to say that, well, this is kind of free will, even though I agree that it's all predetermined, but we can.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that compatibilists, they often are basically determinists in terms of what they think, like in terms of metaphysics. They just think that what free will means, or what it's important that it means for our purposes, isn't negated by determinism. Gotcha. So they're determinists who think that, like, well, it's close enough to freedom, that it serves all the things that we want freedom to do.
Sure.
So it involves reducing our expectations for what freedom should do, I guess.
It seems like a very religious argument to me. Like when people are religious, oftentimes like I need purpose in my life, I need an afterlife, and I need a way to live my life, right? So since I know these three things must be met, I don't care how I get there. God has to be real because that has to happen, and I don't care if it's rational or not, right? And it seems kind of like when I read like the compatibilism memes, it seems more or less that it's like we have to have some way of measuring morality, and free will has to exist. I don't give a fuck how we define free will, but we have to make it. It has to be a thing, even if free will is entirely predetermined and deterministic. As long as we get to call it free will, like everything else still works, you know.
Yeah, I think some people definitely reason that way, and I do think that that's something somewhat unsatisfying about it. I mean, the philosophical view that I guess I find most convincing on this point is that as human beings, we kind of have no choice but to view the world through a kind of first-person perspective where it seems like we can make choices, and so from that there's an extent to which it makes sense to adopt that perspective and say, okay, it seems like I have a choice. and let's treat that as a separate thing from what we know. Maybe it is the case that every choice I make is determined, but as a practical matter, never mind like what's actually metaphysically true.
Sure.
As a practical matter, I kind of have to act as if I have freedom. I think that kind of view makes sense, where you say like, okay, maybe freedom doesn't exist in the sense of like I have actual causal like ability to intervene in the usual like physical chains of cause and effect. Like I don't think that makes sense to say, but I do think it makes sense to say like for the sake of my own action, I'm going to pretend that free will exists because I kind of need to think this way and I have no choice. Like I think humans we can't really actually think of ourselves as purely deterministic beings. We kind of have to think of ourselves as having some kind of free agency, even if we recognize that it's an illusion. We sort of, because it's just the nature of our perception is that we feel like we're in control of ourselves.
Yeah,
and I think so I think it's worth acknowledging that. So that's basically my take on it.
Sure.
Is that like metaphysically, no, there's no good defense of the fact that we have free will, but in terms of like the pragmatic matter of how we make day-to-day decisions, we have to sort of pretend like we do.
Yeah, and that makes sense to me. I think that's I hear that being posited by determinists as well. That like a reasonable determinist will say, our life is almost entirely deterministic, but we should act as though we have free will anyway, just so that things make sense. Okay, I have one request now for a video, okay? That you can do or not do, okay? I don't want to take up more of your time tonight, but this is a topic that is very, very, very interesting to me. I feel like, and this is the biggest issue that I have with transgender issues, is that on one end, you have a lot of progressive people, or yourself included to some extent, that argue for, or I guess to a large extent, that argue for non-binary in terms of how we approach gender, right? That there is some overlap between male and female. There is some ambiguity, and it seems worthless to even have these, male and female, that this could be more of a non-binary thing. It seems to me that the existence of transgender people and the pushing for transgender rights and everything seems to fly in the face of that. Like it almost seems like a hardcore affirmation of gender roles. I would be really interested to hear like a big breakdown on that, or some kind of. Do you understand like the kind of point I'm getting at?
So the suggestion would be that, for instance, some transgender people have an intense sense of their gender identity, and that seems to be something that defies socialization and something that comes from within, maybe.
I guess like the confusing part would be like, how do you tell somebody like, and I don't know this because I'm not a trans person, so I can't say like, how do you have somebody? Let's say you have a woman who is very, very much a tomboy. What's the difference between them and a trans and a transgender man?
Yeah, so I think in this case that there is. I think it's a spectrum between these things. I think there's no definitive dividing line. There's no like definite series of boxes that you can check that's going to define who is just a tomboy and who is a trans man. But I think that as a kind of very rough criterion, if you feel like so I think a tomboy, the usual understanding of a tomboy is that she doesn't feel like a man per se. It's just sort of into masculine things. And so I guess that the distinction just sort of comes in terms of whether they actually want to live their life as a man or whether they just prefer masculine sort of expression in some way.
Yeah.
I mean, when it comes to non-binary, obviously we introduce way more degrees of way more possible sort of marks along this spectrum. So I don't think that there is like a hard distinction that comes to any given point. But I think that if it becomes sort of a significant issue in your life where your assigned birth gender is like really like dissatisfying to you, then I think that's the point where it's worth identifying as trans. But I think there's a lot of gray area there where people are going to be like, well, am I just a masculine woman or am I a man?
Yeah, that's always the big confusing thing to me. Like, to take a group of like trans women, and like if this group of trans women had been raised in a society where women were like mechanics and engineers and men like stayed at home and put on makeup and everything, and the women were very hairy, like would they still be trans women? Would they still want to be men? Or are the social roles kind of like, I feel like that's a really interesting question. And I find myself running into this conundrum sometimes where, like, on one end, I want to argue against traditional gender roles. And I do this all the time. My girlfriend, was an engineer, worked for Lockheed Martin as a systems engineer, very intelligent. And I want to argue against, gender roles and whatnot. But then on the other end, it's like, well, this person feels like they're a woman as a biological fact. And it's like, well, what does that mean? They feel like a woman because they want to do womanly things. But I thought you said that there were no womanly things or manly things. Like, it's like a really confusing area,
Yeah, I think it has to be something more than just like, I'm a woman and I want to be an engineer. You know what I mean? Like, I think it can't just be that, because I know women who are engineers or want to be engineers, and they basically in other respects feel like women, like they don't feel deeply dissatisfied with the female body and so on. Mm-hmm. And so I think that again, if it's just in one area of your life, or it's just in terms of gaining an advantage in one thing, like a career advantage or an ability to do a career that you sort of are prohibited from doing or are discouraged from doing as your assigned birth gender, mm-hmm. I think that that's not enough to say that you're trans. But if on sort of multiple levels you feel just like deeply uncomfortable with the gender you're assigned at birth, that's the point. And it's of course an individual decision. So sure. It's Well, I don't think there's a clear boundary dividing the tomboy from the trans man. I think there's going to be a series of shades of gray, and it's the ultimate decision comes down to how you prefer to live your life. So I think that in the past, yeah, probably some very, very tomboyish girls would be trans men now, if they knew they had that option. And I think there's also room for women to just be kind of gender nonconformist while still identifying as women. I guess it just comes down to sort of a matter of intellectual preference, whatever the individual person is most comfortable identifying with. Sure. I think, for instance, my genderqueer identity, if I lived in a society where what we are gender assigned at birth was like placed literally no restriction on terms of how people view your expression or your role, I don't think I would feel the need to identify as genderqueer. I would just be a person doing whatever I wanted. But to me, I guess, so, especially being a feminine man, it kind of demands an explanation. Yeah. Like people want to know what's the deal. Like you can't just be a man wearing a dress and not say anything about that.
Sure.
like people want to know what's going on. Like what the fuck is this? Like it demands an explanation. And so genderqueer amounts to that explanation for me. But like I said, if I lived in a genderless society, then there would be no such thing as genderqueer.
Sure.
That's at least my current thinking about it.
Okay, well, cool. I appreciate the breakdown.
Yeah.
Any
Hopefully
final
that
thoughts
makes
or
sense.
anything?
I don't know. I'm getting pretty drunk. I should probably stop talking.
Sure then. Well, I appreciate it. Keep fighting.
I've had this whole bottle of wine. Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I appreciate the conversation. Good luck.
Yeah, sure thing.